Hi, my name's Keith Cooper, Northlight Images, and in this video I'm going to have a look at the Epson P700. It's a sort of question and answer video because I reviewed this a while ago. I took the printer back to Epson and I've got it back again because I didn't have it very long to test it when it first came out. This is also a brand new printer, so I've set it up from scratch. And I wanted to make sure that I was testing a proper production printer rather than an early sample one which I had for my original review. But anyway, I'm going to have a look at a whole load of different features. Now, I've got lots more detailed stuff on the P700 and the similar P900, videos and written articles. I would say have a look at the written articles as well. They do tend to have more technical details in them and they cover more detailed stuff that's not quite so easy to cover in a video. So diagrams and charts and graphs and things like that. But anyway, let's have a look at the features of the P700. It's a 13-inch A3 Plus printer. It uses a pigment ink set, and it's the development of what was the P600 earlier version. The P900 is the development of what was the P800. Now I've got lots of details of those on the Northlight site if you're curious at looking at details of the older printers. So I've got reviews going back many years of all different printers. What you've got with this is, I'll lift up the top here, the inks. Now as you can see, there's quite a lot. We have 10 inks. We've got two blacks, a matte black and a photo black. The reason there are two blacks, people often ask about this, is that different black ink formulations work differently on different types of paper. So if I want to print on a matte paper, whether it's document printing or fine art printing, I need a slightly different formulation of black for optimal results to printing on photo papers. It's because of the way the inks are made, how they work. It's why you get the two blacks. I get a lot of people ask, what does blacks matter really to it? It depends on the formulation of the blacks and the media type you're using. Now, the media types are also developed to work with the blacks, so it works as a bit of a circle there as to what you get. The big thing in the 700 here, and please do excuse me if I get the numbers wrong, so I test quite a few printers and it's easy to get them slightly mixed up sometimes. It's the P700. So with the 700 here, the inks I've got, I no longer need to swap between the blacks. On the older printers, on the P800 for example, you needed to say to the printer, and this goes back to the earlier 3800, 3880, various other models, you needed to say, we're using matte black or we're using photo black. Now you could get it to automatically switch depending on your media settings, but with this one you don't need to. Both black inks are connected and available at the same time. That means that if you set it to use a matte paper, the matte ink will do. If you're using a glossy paper, luster paper, or any normal photo paper, then the PK or photo black will be in use. So that's taken care of the blacks. We've got two greys, a grey and a light grey. Now, it varies on the ink set as to what the predominant role of the greys is. Partly, the greys are there to allow you to use stronger main colours. So this has a violet, and it has a vivid magenta and a cyan and a yellow. So we've got the violet added to the normal CMYK set with the blacks here. So the greys soften the intensity of the strong colours. So if you want to print a light magenta colour, you can print a bit of strong magenta and a bit of grey. Now this one also has a light magenta ink, so that gives you even more options. Now it's one of the bits of printer operation that very few people ever appreciate. The manufacturers say very little about it, but the key to inkjet quality and the improvements that I've seen in inkjet printers over the last 10-15 years, a lot of it comes as to how the tiny dots of ink in all these different colours are mixed together on the paper, and that's what gives, in essence, good print quality. So you might say, well, these inks don't look very different from several generations of printer ago. What's the real difference? A lot of the difference is how those inks are applied. It's also connected with the print head as to how fine the droplets can be and whether the droplets of ink can be changed in their size. All of this affects how the ink appears on the paper. So there's a lot of software goes into the workings in these that you see nothing of. You think of the printer, it's an RGB device, you send an RGB, a red, green, blue, normal colour image file, you send it to it. The combination of the driver and the firmware in here, the software that's running inside this, decide how to lay out the dots of ink. And that's what makes for print quality. And that's one of the reasons why you get particularly nice prints from this. It does it well, and it has lots of inks to choose from. So we've got no black, but I mentioned the greys can be used to expand the range of the colours and improve gradients, so you get smoother gradients. For example, skies, sunsets. Anywhere where you've got smooth, delicate gradients of colour, having more inks helps, and the greys help for that. But in this printer as well, the greys work well for black and white printing, which is one of the reasons why if somebody says to me, what printer do you want to use, Keith? I use a pigment ink printer, and I use one with multiple greys in it, because that helps give me the smoothness I want in black and white. It also gives me a more neutral black and white that doesn't have, or is less prone to, colour tints depending on the viewing lighting. So the lighting in here, LED halogen replacement bulbs, they have a colour temperature, I don't know, around just under 4K, so 4000K. I've got a bit of daylight coming in today. There's a brick wall over there, so I've got a warmish daylight coming in. Now that means in a typical viewing environment, you'll have all kinds of mixtures of colours. Now, when you print black and white with dye-based inks, you can get a bit of what's called illuminant metamerism. And this is where your black and white prints come out slightly greenish or slightly magenta-ish tinge. You don't really want that. You can correct it to some extent. I've covered this in loads of other videos and articles looking at black and white. But you don't really want that, so this is where something like the extra greys come in and produce a good signal, a good, nice, smooth print for black and white. These work very well, and I'll come back to black and white in more detail in a bit when I cover some software. But suffice to say, there are our inks. Now, the inks cartridges themselves, these are the initial cartridges. The ink cartridges come in for the P700. They come in at 25 millilitres, 25 ml of ink per cartridge. Now, I'm going to say I find that a bit small. I'll come back to comparative ink costs between this and the P900, which uses the same size ink cartridges, but with more ink in them. So that's, I'll look at print costs a bit later in the video. But suffice to say, when you set these up, these inks, ink has to go from the cartridges through the pipework into the print head. Everything needs setting up. It's all set up when you do your initialization of the printer. Covered that elsewhere. Some of that ink goes through, and for ongoing cleaning purposes, it goes through into a maintenance tank or maintenance cart. And here is a spare one in its box. It just slots in here. Now, when you've loaded up the inks of this, there is perhaps only 25% of carts left. So you're going to, with the P700, you're probably going to need new ink cartridges within, well, they don't run out altogether. They'll run out depending on the printing you do. You're probably going to need your first ink cartridge after 30-40 large prints. Now, it's not that many. So what I would say is that you almost certainly, when you get one of these, you're going to need to budget for some new inks as well. And that's the P700 inks, so there's a yellow one there for it. Now, the printer comes with maintenance cartridge, which also gets significantly filled during the setup process. It's not just filled with ink, I hasten to add, so it's not just ink goes into it. The tubes and everything here and the ink and the print head have a shipping fluid in them. It helps prevent damage during transit, particularly air transit, where any ice crystals forming in the lines is a very bad news for a printer. So there's quite a lot of liquid in there that needs flushing out. That goes into the maintenance cartridge. It means also your maintenance cartridge is going to be used up fairly quickly. Fortunately, Epson supply with the printer a spare one. What I would say is that once you put the spare one in, it will likely last for years. They don't fill up very quickly. So whilst you are likely to need some more ink relatively quickly if you do much printing, you're highly unlikely to need a new maintenance cartridge. So don't rush out and keep a spare one of these. You will have lots of warning when it gets low, and the second one here, I would think it's going to take a long while before you empty that one out. So that's your ink cartridges. Right, let's have a look at how paper goes through this thing. There are several slots. There's the top slot at the back. For most of my testing on higher quality papers, I used the rear feed. Now it's a centre feed, so there are two rails that come in and set the width. So nearly everything I did went through there. Depending on the thickness of the paper, you can stack several sheets, but a few sheets is better. Now, there's also front feed. Now, you can put in, and there's the width being set, so that's set for A4, and there's A3 plus, or 13 inch by 19, has inches on the side here as well. You can load board in here. I've printed on poster board, thin poster board. There are various types of it. The one I used was an Epson board, and I don't know that it's necessarily available in all regions, but certainly in the UK I was able to get A3 plus poster board. It's a matte finish, double-sided, prints very well. You put it in, it goes in. One thing to note, if you're going to put stuff in here, when it goes through the printer, it has to go right the way through the printer and out the back before it can come back through and be printed. Things that are printed come out here, and there's the tray to collect your prints. But remember that if you're going to put stuff in through the feed here, it has to go in and then come back out and be printed. And that means you may need quite a bit of space at the back if you're using A3 plus, so 13 inch by 19 inch. It comes out a good distance out the back. Bear that in mind, because if you don't, it makes a very solid bang against the wall when the paper comes out, because it's coming straight and it just hits and it won't do things any good. So there's your normal feed there. You've got feed, it'll do CDs as well, if anyone's still wanting to print CDs. And there is at the back a roll holder. Now the roll unit, I'll just put this here. That flips down. You can see the slot where media comes out straight through part. We pull that out, and there is a roll support for putting 13 inch or up to 13 inch width roll paper through. Now, it's a neat idea having it built in like that. 13 inch roll paper is not common. Epson produce some, I think they produce glossy and luster paper in roll format like that. A local supplier here in the UK, I got from Photospeed, I got some fine art matte paper in 13 inch roll. It takes a bit of a search. It's not a common size. So if you want to do roll printing, have a good reason to do roll printing, because there's no cutter in this, so you will need to trim things with scissors. I use wallpaper scissors for it, so you'll need that. So that's the feed at the back there. Now that just folds away when it's not in use, and it's a nicely compact printer. But let's say 13 inch media, not common, but it does look pretty good. You can get some nice prints. You can of course feed custom media sizes into it. Now you can set custom media types. There is software that enables you to control the media types and set up media types. You can do that, and you can set some aspects from the screen here. Now it's a nice screen, good quality screen on it. it has an option when you're printing the image that's being printed. You get it displayed on the screen here, which helps show that you've not actually got the wrong one. It also gives you a pretty reliable estimate of how long it's going to take to print. And there are lots of other information you can pull up, so obviously the ink levels, all the usual stuff you'd expect from printer controls are there. It's a good screen, it's a touch screen, so it works nicely. One feature I should mention is that there is also a light inside, an optional light, which shows the print as it's being printed, which is, I find that very helpful. I find it useful on large format printers, and great to see it appearing on a smaller printer like this. It's just some LEDs inside, they light it up. Remember they're LED lighting, so the colour accuracy may not be as close as you want it. So don't think when you see the print coming out through here, all those colours look a little off. Wait until they come out here until you realise they look a bit off and you've done something wrong. Because the printer itself is an excellent printer. If you mess up making prints, I'm going to put money on the fact that it's your fault. If I get duff print come out of this printer, it's my fault. That goes for almost any modern printer of decent quality, i.e. expensive enough. It's very difficult to make bad prints with these. You have to try. There are all kinds of ways things can go wrong, but you do have to try about it. So that's the general setup of that. I've used it with wireless, I've used it USB, and I've used it wired Ethernet. It works just fine on all of them. So there you go. I've had no problems on the setup of it. One thing I would notice, if you're using a Mac, make sure the printer driver that you select when you set things up has not got the word AirPrint in it. The AirPrint driver, I'm sure it has uses, it causes all kinds of problems. If you're using a Mac and you find that half your printer settings appear to have vanished, they're just not there, make sure you haven't accidentally selected an AirPrint driver, because the AirPrint driver can cause all kinds of problems because it's effectively a dumbed down printing solution. Now, if you want a dumbed down printing solution, so printing from your phone or an iPad or something like that, then it's great. If you want to make good quality prints, it's a disaster. So if you get that problem and you're using a Mac, it's quite a common occurrence. I've had people do it. I cover it in the setup guides. Now, I've got setup guides, videos, written articles about this. So all the stuff I've mentioned so far, I've covered in more detail in the actual review and other aspects I've done. But anyway, now let's have a look at some prints and the software I've used to print them. Now, I've got lots of prints covered in other articles and examples of them and that, so I'll not show lots of them because I don't feel they really show a great deal doing it on a video. Let's start off with software I'm using to print. In almost all the examples I show, I'm using the Epson print layout or EPL software. It's free software. I choose it partly because it's very easy to show people. It works the same on Windows and on Mac, so there's no problem there. I'm not using Photoshop, I'm not using Lightroom or anything like that, which makes it much easier to explain. If you want to use those, then they work fine. Now, EPL, is that the printing solution that I'll take? Well, not quite. It's good, but there are one or two little glitches in it. In particular, I noticed that when I was using it to print borderless, that the number of borderless print options available in EPL are slightly less than I find using the driver from Photoshop. So if I want to print borderless, and here's an example I did the other day of a borderless print, I will choose to print from Photoshop. You could print from Lightroom or something else like that, using the borderless expansion options, because when you print borderless, the image has to be expanded slightly to go over the edge of the paper, particularly if it is not the same aspect ratio or shape as the paper. So that means that if you're not careful, and in this example, this is where it went slightly wrong, you can end up with a tiny white border. It's a fraction of a millimetre on this, and that's because the print wasn't expanded enough. Now, I've covered that elsewhere. Have a look at the written review, have a look at what I've got about making borderless prints as well. But I just mentioned that as a warning, because normally I would suggest using EPL for everything. If I'm sort of showing people how to use printers like this, I'll pick EPL. It's a simple way of showing it, and it's cross-platform. So that's, apart from a minor problem there, does actually show up. This is on a luster paper. It's a very nice luster paper. This one is a permajet one, Oyster. It's a 275 gram. Really nice finish. There are some smooth gradients in this that work very well. It's exactly what I'd expect from a pigment printer like this. It produces very nice prints. Here's a bit taken from roll paper, this image here, Porthleven in Cornwall, and that's printed on roll paper. Now that's a luster finish paper. I can't remember which one it is, because apart from this, I haven't written on the back what it is, exactly what it is. So anyway, I'd need to check to find out what that one was, but it works a treat. There is no problem using roll paper with it. I would say if you're using roll paper, don't leave the roll paper in when it's not in use. The support system, roll paper support system on this, supports the edges of the paper, and it actually touches on the print surface of the paper. So if you left it there for any length of time, it's resting on rollers, they could make marks on the paper. So if you want to use roll, load the roll, make the print, unload the roll it back up, put it back in its box. That's the way to handle roll papers. Unless you've got a much bigger printer which is designed for having the paper there all the while. They tend to have spindles, so it's a spindle-based system. This one is not a spindle-based system there, so it can cause a few issues. So there's a couple of colour prints there. To get the best colour prints out of this, you need to make profiles. You either need profiles, Epson profiles for Epson paper, or some suppliers of papers do actually produce profiles which they will make downloadable for their papers. For printers at this level, it's much more common. Incidentally, the profiles for the P700 and P900 are interchangeable, because they really are that similar apart from the size of the printer. You can swap the printers over. So I make my own profiles. Profiles I've made for here are available on request. They're listed in the written review, so do check that for the list of profiles I've made. There are quite a lot of them. Have a look at those. If they're of use to you, as I said, they're free for non-commercial use. Here's one. This is on a art type paper. I think this is HP, this is aqua, no, this is Hahnemuhle watercolour 210 paper. These, I tend to keep these because they give a very good indication of the colour gamut and the differences of different papers. So there is a watercolour paper, and there is one for, and that's for the print that the building was done on. Now, I'm not entirely certain you'll be able to see the difference here on the video. I'll just move them around a little bit. But looking at this, I can see that the colours are much more intense on the luster paper than they are on the art paper. You get that. Now, I've done other videos about choosing papers, and also a video about which sorts of paper suit which sort of image. So don't assume that just because there are lots more colours on the luster paper that images look better. They may look better on one of these other papers. So here's a cotton rag paper. That is a Hewlett-Packard Aquarelle paper. And there's an image, low-key image, printed on one of the textured art papers. Now, purely depends on what your personal tastes are. There's no hard and fast rules as to such and such a paper, you should use such and such for a particular image. It varies. What I would say is, if you are new to a printer like this, do not go out and buy a whole range of papers of some famous make, some well-known brand of paper, get a sample pack of it and off you go. That is a great way to waste paper. I always say if you've got a new printer and it's new to you, you get the printer first, then you choose the paper. You don't choose the paper and then get your printer and hope that it'll work. So for that, what paper do I use for testing? Good old Epson Premium Luster. Now I use this for all my basic Epson printer testing. Similarly, I use Canon basic luster paper when I'm testing Canon printers. If I make a print on this and it comes out wrong, I know something's come out wrong. If I make a print on some third-party paper and I'm not sure how it looks, how do I know what's gone wrong? How do I know if the paper's any good? Take time to start with some basic papers, some test images. Now, I've covered loads of this in other videos, so I'll not go into it in any more detail, but that's the paper I start with. Yeah, it's an A4 pack. It's Epson Premium Luster. It's not the greatest paper, but it's a good paper and it works well. And it will show up any problems anywhere. So I really do have to, sort of emphasize that you do not go straight out and say, oh, I just bought, and I get emails sent to me saying this, Keith, I've just bought myself a P700 and I've bought a pack of some paper that I may or may not have ever heard of. How should I use it? And so I'm going to say, you bought yourself one of these, you're new to it, leave it in the box until you actually know what you're doing. Yeah, I know there's the urge to just rush out, but I test enough printers that I've found that having a methodical approach to doing this really does make a difference. Now, these are all colour images. What about black and white? Use the ABW mode in the driver, that's advanced black and white. So if you're printing from something like Photoshop or Lightroom, you have the colour management is left to the printer. And then in the printer driver, you select the black and white print mode, and that does the ABW. And the ABW mode is by far and away the best way of printing black and white on these Epson pigment ink printers like this, whether it be small ones like this right up to the larger printers that I've tested. I'll always use that. It could be tweaked, it could be adjusted. I've covered that in articles and various things and that, but use the ABW mode. So you do not need profiles for black and white printing with these because there's a black and white print mode. You can use that through here, for instance, EPL. One thing I would say about EPL, I've noticed that the download links on the European site seem broken. Well, last time I checked, they may have been fixed by now, I don't know. It's also available on the Epson US site, so you have to do a search for it. Epson Print Layout or EPL, it's a free download software, well worth trying if you're getting into this. And it's the, when people ask me, oh, I want to try some printing, I would say try using EPL. It's easy. By all means, if you outgrow it, and it's got lots of tricks in it. It'll do gallery wraps and things for canvas and other stuff like that. So there's lots of useful functions it does have. But start off with that. Download, it's free, Mac and PC. Now, one minor thing I would say on black and white printing on this is that certainly when I was testing it on the Premium Luster here, I tested it at all the different print settings. I got a black and white test image for doing this. And I noticed that at the highest quality print settings, there was a bit of bronzing. Now that's a slight colour sheen that you get on a print when you look at it at a certain angle. And essentially with that, what it means is that for black and white printing on this paper here and some other luster papers, I would choose a medium print quality setting rather than the highest print quality setting. Now, you do need to check with your different papers when you're trying them as to whether the print quality settings make any difference. They don't necessarily make that much of a difference. Adding the ultra high quality carbon black, etc., etc., etc. mode in the driver may look good, certainly works for marketing purposes, but doesn't necessarily make for a better picture. So if you're experimenting a bit with the modes, don't automatically assume that the best print mode is best. It may make a difference on an image, it may not. It's one of those things you'll have to test. Now, I've addressed this elsewhere, and I've got a specific article about black and white printing as well to look at the bronzing and aspects like that, as I'm not going to go into a great deal of details here. But anyway, that's the gist of that. Now, I'll just finish off with, a lot of people ask me, P700, P900. What's differences, similarities between them. Now, I've got a P700 versus P900 video that I did a while ago. I've used both printers quite a bit more since then, and I would say that it's convinced me of a few things. One is that the printers are, from a print point of view, absolutely identical, apart from the width. You can swap printer profiles. That shows there's a lot of similarity at that level. So printer profiles, that. So if you want to find out some more about the P700, read some of my P900 articles, because they will have stuff and videos. They will have stuff that overlaps to some extent. The only real difference between them that most people will notice comes back to these ink cartridges. With the P900 you get 50ml cartridges. With the P700 you get 25ml cartridges. These need replacing relatively soon after you've got the printer. I wouldn't say immediately, but 30-40 prints and there's a chance you may run low on one of the inks. These 25ml prints, the ink costs are significantly higher on a 700. Now, doing the numbers is tricky, and I have a few links that I point to people to giving a broad idea of print cost. It's very difficult to do, and it's something I avoid doing in great detail because it needs a lot of printing, a lot of measurement, and a lot of calculation, and a lot more patience than I really have to do that sort of stuff. What I would say is that the ink cost of the P900 versus the 700 here is about 70%. So P900 inks are cheaper. However, the P900 printer costs more. So what I would say is that cheaper ink cost of the P900 depends on you doing enough prints. So very broadly, if I bought a P700 and a spare set of inks and P900, now there's more ink left, but I would need some spare inks at some point. The overall cost of printing is broadly similar by the time I've done a few hundred prints, A3 plus size prints on the P900. So if you're only ever going to print a few hundred prints on the P700, then the cheapness of the inks of the P900 is not going to make much difference. If you're going to print a lot, then that's where the difference comes in. Now, I wish that Epson produced larger print cartridges than even the 50ml that goes into the P900, 25ml in these. It would be nice if they would actually make larger carts available. I can see why they might not. Just think it would be a nice thing to do for their customers, but then, you know, what's that? I don't sell inks, I don't sell printers, so that's just a personal observation there. I'll finish off with saying that, yeah, it's a great printer, makes great prints. Of course, you need to know what you're doing, you need to have good paper, you need to have good profiles, you need to know what you're doing in terms of editing, but that's it. If anyone has any additional questions about the 700, please do let me know in the comments for the video. I've tried to base this on questions I've been asked about the printer. There's bound to be stuff I've missed, stuff I've not thought of. Please do let me know. I'm happy to answer questions, and if you ask an interesting enough question, it may well be the basis of an entire new video, since that's often where I get my ideas from. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you found it useful. Please subscribe to the channel if you found it useful. There's lots of other stuff, not just printing on it, and thank you very much.